I'm so excited for this episode. This is something that is near and dear to my heart. We recently launched a fertility product, and after doing so much research, I saw that our community was just like really struggling around not feeling seen or heard culturally through one of the most vulnerable times in their lives when they're trying to conceive. And I'm so excited to welcome Robin and Hannah to this episode. And I would love for both of you to introduce yourselves. But before you do, Robin was a medical advisor for Ritual and someone that I deeply admire and respect in the functional health field. She's one of the first people that I came to when I was starting Ritual, and I was like, what do you think? She gave me a lot of amazing, amazing feedback. She's a genius. And then Hannah is also a partner for Ritual and someone that I've followed and deeply admire in the wellness space, and someone who has a really deep story personally when it comes to fertility that I'm really excited for you to share. So with that, Hannah, maybe you can kick us off and tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey with fertility.
Sure. I'm Hannah Bronfman. I'm an influencer, an advocate, an author, and an investor. And I've spent my entire career really in wellness and had a deeper kind of understanding of the healthcare industry and maternal health when I went through my own journey to becoming a mom, which took me on a wild fertility journey, one that was about 3 years long, ended in IVF and ended with 2 beautiful kids, but have a lot of thoughts. Don't know really where we want to start, but yeah, that's kind of a little bit about me.
So many places we can start. But
yeah.
Before we do, Robin, I'd love to hear your story of starting Parsley and just your deep passion around this topic too.
Well, thank you for having me. This is an awesome conversation and a topic that's super near and dear to my heart, both because I'm a mom of 3 kids, all of which I had after 35 while starting a company. And so, also have my own fertility journey. And because a big part of what I do as a functional medicine doctor and expert in hormone health and metabolic health and immune health and mental health and gut health and really whole body health is work with women throughout kind of the lifespan of their health. And one of the things that I'm probably the proudest of about Parsley, which is my medical practice, it's the largest functional medicine platform in the country, and we provide care across the country, both online and in person. But we have a lot of women get pregnant. And it's weird to be about part of that story, but whether it's supporting an IVF journey, whether it's helping uncover the root causes of impaired fertility, which I'm sure we'll talk about all of that today, I don't think that there's anywhere close to the level of support or guidance or knowledge from our medical community about the fertility journey. And certainly not the only thing we do, but a big thing that I love to do. And so we love all the Parsley babies out there.
Love the Parsley babies, love the Ritual babies. Like my favorite thing. So I'd love to kind of set the record straight. Robin, if you can help us dive into what factors impact female fertility and what are some of the things that your patients are typically unaware and that really surprises them.
I think for when it comes to fertility, we've all been told a story for a long time that it kind of comes down to age. And that's not really entirely true. Many, many women are able to conceive both on their own and now thanks to technology like IVF, later in life. But there's also a lot of reasons why people struggle with fertility that no one pays attention to. And the way I always describe it in medicine is I see over and over again women coming in struggling with fertility, with questions about fertility, and like no one's looked under the hood and said, why can't she get pregnant? And the answer is not always discoverable. Sometimes we just don't know. But there's a lot that is going on that can be addressed. And that comes down to things that people might be surprised by. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is actually the number one cause of impaired fertility. PCOS is largely a metabolic or blood sugar issue. So sometimes we can address the blood sugar issues or use progesterone to kind of kickstart a woman's menstrual cycle again. I've had a lot of success with that. Like one of my patients who was told she would never conceive without IVF. She had a history of thyroid cancer. She had PCOS, very irregular, erratic periods. And through a combination of diet, supporting her metabolic health, some progesterone support, in her case, we were able to help her get her cycle back, and then she was able to conceive. And so that's just an example of how when we don't kind of take a beat and do the work, there are these resolvable cases where that was a great outcome. And that follows through with conditions like autoimmune, even nutrient deficiencies, genetic factors like MTHFR. I could go on, but there's so much we can do holistically if we do the right tests and address the whole person.
I love that, addressing the whole person. That's really probably one of the best things that we can do for our health. And you guys both mentioned that you had your own journey with fertility. So Hannah, I'd love to hear your journey with your fertility journey. You have 2 beautiful kids now. Would love to learn more.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I didn't realize until I was on this journey that I also had MTHFR. And so that was definitely like eye-opening, and changed the way that I was taking supplements and trying to support myself from that holistic aspect. But for me, I really, I'm someone who is very health conscious, felt like I was, in a great age range of getting pregnant. I felt like my body was ready, and I had done all of the things, right? I had already worked on my hormone health. I had done a heavy metal detox. I felt like I was in this great place to conceive and have a baby. And then about 6 months into trying, I decided I wanted to see a fertility specialist, just because I felt like waiting a year was making me more anxious. And I know that also part of being able to conceive is your mental state, and being less stressed is obviously optimal for the body. So I went to go see a specialist, and we did all the tests, and everything was pointing to normal. My husband also did a bunch of tests. Again, everything was pointing to normal, which was a little bit frustrating, honestly, because in some cases, I wish we just had identified something that we felt like was off. And with, when you know something that's going on, you have an action plan, as I'm sure Dr. Berzin can say, okay, we see what's going on, let's work backwards from here. But they weren't really discovering anything out of the ordinary. So we kept going with the fertility drugs, like the Clomids of the world. And I actually ended up getting pregnant on Clomid, and then having a miscarriage. And that was my first miscarriage. And that was totally devastating. And I was not emotionally prepared for that. At the time, I felt like we as a society weren't really talking about miscarriages yet. It just felt like something I was going through alone. And I didn't understand why I felt all this shame, and that there wasn't this community that I could go to. And so that actually led me to share my experience online with my community. I feel like at that point, my community was very invested in my journey, and they've always been a part of my health journey. So that's really when I decided I was going to lift the curtain and bring my community along for this rocky ride, for better or for worse. So I kept going down this journey of fertility drugs, and then turning to IUIs, and I still wasn't getting pregnant. So my doctor said to me, I think the next thing we should do is IVF. And it took me a while to get comfortable with that suggestion. And I think the only reason why it took me a while to get comfortable is because I had envisioned that I was going to get pregnant naturally, and I was a healthy woman, and there was nothing wrong with me. So why couldn't I get pregnant? And I just felt like I was sort of in disbelief that I needed this kind of medical intervention. When I told my husband that that was the suggestion of our doctor, his reaction was okay, great. Let's go for it. Let's just do this. What does it matter how the journey happens? what we're looking for is to have our babies. And if she thinks that this is going to be the next path forward, let's just go for it. And I really needed to hear that. And I really think his reaction and his support and his immediate not thinking like that was weird or anything, like he completely had no stigmas attached to it. I think that reaction really allowed me to say to myself, okay, if this is my new narrative, like, let's just own it. And as a storyteller, I think I just needed to have that shift in my mindset. And so I actually kind of tried to flip the script for myself and say, you know what, you're right. Let's just go all in. And the fact that I was going to be giving myself shots made me feel empowered. I didn't want my husband to do them for me. I didn't want a nurse to do them for me. I wanted to fill my shot up. And if I was going to be at dinner, I was going to excuse myself from dinner and go do it in the bathroom. And I was going to document it. And this was going to be part of the journey for me that I could control. And that empowered me. We had a crazy situation actually happen when we were going through IVF. We went through the 2 weeks of shots, follicles were growing, things were looking good, was maturing the way it was supposed to. And then it came time to do our trigger shot. And I'll never forget, it was the Sunday of Rosh Hashanah. And we got home at around 5 p.m. And maybe at around 7 o'clock, I pulled out the trigger shot just to make sure I had it. We were going to take it at 9, or we were supposed to take it at 11:30 p.m. And I'm looking through the freezer, looking through the refrigerator, and I cannot find the trigger shot. And I'm like, Brendan, like, where is the trigger shot? Like, what's going on? And he's like, I don't know. Like, what do you mean? And so we're like turning the house over. The trigger shot is not there. And I'm like, this is crazy. Like, what have I done all this stuff for? Like, tonight is the night. Like, I start spiraling. It's Rosh Hashanah. Everywhere is closed. I am like, literally, I don't know what to do. We call the nurses line, and we essentially meet a nurse on a corner and we get a backup trigger shot. And I mean, it was like unmarked, but the nurse was like, trust me. I'm like, you know what, at this point, I am trusting you. Like, I'm going with God here. Here we go.
Did you trade her for some apples and honey?
Yeah, exactly. And I took that trigger shot that night and I did my retrieval, I think, 48 hours later, 24 hours later. We had a very successful outcome. And I can't tell you how badly that was like the win that I needed to have. And it was after, the 5-day period, once we heard how many embryos we had that were genetically tested and good to go and viable, that I actually said to myself, okay, now I want to take like 3 months to just chill and get my body back, get off hormones before, I do my implantation. And I just want to remember why we are on this journey, and get that spark back between my husband and I before we bring another person into the mix. It had just been a long road, and it was so like mentally and physically draining. And actually, sorry.
You're so brave for sharing that and sharing it publicly, because I know so many people that feel just so alone in that journey, and you brought people with you, and that's so powerful.
It was a way of healing for myself. And I also, once I put it out there and the responses I was getting, I knew that people were clearly suffering in silence as well. And so it was one of those things that brought a different level of actual like vocal community together, in a way that I hadn't seen my community show up before. And it was really beautiful to be a part of. The stories that I've received and still receive is really like incredible. But what I was going to say is that after we did IVF, my doctor shared with me what she felt was going on and why we weren't getting pregnant naturally. And I'd actually be so curious to hear, Dr. Berzin, what you think about that. My doctor told me that my eggs had a very thick protein outer layer that only sperm with a super amount of enzymes would be able to penetrate. Now, my husband's sperm was the normal amount of enzymes. They weren't super, they weren't low. And it was only through IVF that they were able to penetrate my egg with his sperm. It's like some bizarre, and she said it's not something that is hereditary or genetic. Like I'm not necessarily going to pass that on to my kids. And she just said, it's just one of those things.
Well, there's so many environmental factors now that are impacting our bodies every day. And some of them we can test for, like, do you have a thyroid condition? And then we can give you thyroid hormone or correct that. Or do you have an MTHFR variant? And okay, let's give you the right prenatal. I'll never forget going to my first OB at a big hospital in New York, and she had no idea about what a good prenatal was. I think I remember telling you this story. I can't remember, Kat, when we first met.
Yeah.
One of us was pregnant. I think it was you. I think
I was always pregnant.
Yeah, you were ahead of me, and then I was like right behind you and always being pregnant too in this like whole set of years. But in that moment, I remember seeing this OB and, the sort of laughing at the prenatal she recommended for me because it was just a really, sorry, but like crappy prenatal. It had like dyes and sugar, and it didn't have high quality ingredients. And I knew my own, because I'm a functional medicine doctor. I was lucky enough to know my own. I have 2 MTHFR variant copies. So that has implications for my mental health, but it also has implications for how I detoxify and also for my fertility, right? So my point being, there's things we can like that are knowable today, but there's also things, Hannah, that are not knowable today. And I think, in the recent sort of zeitgeist around toxins in our environment, plastics in our body, microplastics, and the fact that there's like the equivalent of a plastic spoon in our brains, the fact that there's plastics and microplastics in, I think 100% of semen samples tested now, right? We know that these things impact fertility negatively in humans. We know they impact fertility negatively in animals, and that's been well established. But there's so much what's knowable, but to your point, there's also so much that's unknowable. And it's really cool that you were able to get this like very interesting piece of information about your eggs. And then it's like, okay, what caused that? Who knows? And is it genetic? Is it something in our environment? And there's not always something that you can do. And so like for us at Parsley, we see a lot. We don't exclusively see women, we see men too, but we see a lot of women, and we are with this journey a lot. One of our favorite things to do is really like support that IVF journey, because we have so many women going through egg freezing, IUI, IVF. And to your point about that sense of control, IVF can be a really overwhelming process. It's long, it's expensive. It can be like soul crushing sometimes to like have it not work. And in that, there is only so much you can control, but then there's a lot about your health that you can control. And I always think of like one of my good friends who's an REI, reproductive endocrinologist, IVF doctor here in New York. He and I both trained at Columbia together a gazillion years ago. But he said to me, I see this all the time. So many women don't have primary care doctors. And he's like, I see a lot of women who've used their GYN sort of as their PCP, but that's like a 15-minute visit once every 2 years. And it's a breast exam and a pap smear and really not much else. And he's like, and then they come to me because they're having trouble getting pregnant. And what he said he sees over and over again is women who have been living with these underlying health issues that no one's tested for, no one's treated. And when we address those, he sends people over to us at Parsley because he's like, well, that means my success ratio, my likelihood of having success with IVF is going to be even better when I address some of those health issues, whether it's blood sugar or immune function or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
For those that are kind of early in their journeys around fertility, Robin, I'd love for you to just like quickly break down what is IUI, what's IVF, what's a trigger shot for someone who hasn't had one. I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah. So, there's lots of types of fertility services and treatments available today. And what's cool is they're evolving all the time. Caveat, I'm not a reproductive endocrinologist. It's not what I do all day, but work with a lot of them. And, intrauterine insemination, IUI, is just essentially taking semen and directly inserting it into the uterus to see if we can sort of better time and avoid the sperm essentially getting caught off at the pass in the vagina on their way through the cervix and not making it. And that's often a really good starting place. It allows you to track hormones, know when you're ovulating, be a little bit more scientific about your timing, and get past that potential hurdle. And then oftentimes that's tried first. It's cheaper, it's less invasive, it doesn't require egg harvesting and fertilization. But if that doesn't work, IVF is when you're actually taking a sperm and an egg, putting them together, often genetically testing them first, assessing for egg quality, assessing for sperm quality, getting a match, and fertilizing them outside of the body, and then implanting that embryo in the body, and hoping that implantation works. And then a trigger shot quickly is when you're in the kind of egg retrieval process. You are kind of getting your body ready with hormones to make a bunch of eggs. Because if they're going to go in there and get eggs, they don't want to get like an egg. They want to get like lots of eggs. And so that trigger shot tells your ovaries, like, time to go, people. Pump your eggs out, so that when you do go into that harvesting process, there are many eggs there, hopefully, so that they have a selection, because not all the eggs make it, not all the eggs are good. And this is all, it's just, even as I describe this, it's so much to go through.
One of the terms that literally creeped me out the most was harvesting. I cannot tell you, when they said that we're going to do an egg harvest, I was like, excuse me, what? Like, I already understand I'm carrying around like a satchel of eggs, and this harvest is throwing me for a loop. I was like, if one more person says harvest around me, I'm going to freak out.
Should we rebrand harvest?
I know.
It's a rebranding.
We need to rebrand it. But I will also say that through the process of IVF, you have to show up every morning to get your blood drawn, right? Because part of the scientific aspect of the timing and knowing how the follicles are developing or how your body is responding to the hormones, you need to take your blood every day. And while that seems like a very taxing, it is. While that is a very taxing part of the process, I will say that at least where I went for IVF, which was in a hospital setting, which kind of sounds very sterile, I will say, like, I did find solace in the other women in the waiting room. Like, that waiting room turned into this, I don't know, you make eyes with another person, you exchange a small tear or a small smile, and like, it just reminds you that you're not alone. And I still chat with the woman who, we had our implantation on the same day, because you end up going through, that process. You're in the waiting room together, you're talking, and then you usually end up having if you get pregnant, you usually end up having babies quite close in age, right? Or you could be days apart. So, when after you go through the implantation and let's say you do get pregnant, you go through the progesterone shots for the first 12 weeks of your pregnancy. And I actually found that I had a lot of anxiety coming off my progesterone shots. I was not convinced that my body was going to do what it was supposed to do. And that was part of the journey that was probably the hardest for me, because I was just like, can I just keep taking these shots, please? Because at least I know that things are developing the way they should and growing and all the things. And anyway, we worked through that, but the progesterone shots were a whole other part of the journey that I feel like doesn't get a lot of exposure, because there are these it's a large needle in the ass.
One thing that I hear from you as you're talking, Hannah, is just like the immense amount of optimism that you've had through that journey, because it's so tough mentally and so stressful, and you had just such an incredible partner by your side, but also just kind of like that resilience that you just had inside of you. And the fact that you like shared that is like beyond. I have a quote here that I'd love to read that just really inspired me from you that says, "As hard as it is to talk about the heartbreak so many of us have suffered, I want to help prepare the future generations so that no one takes getting pregnant for granted." So love to kind of also hear why you share that. I think people do take getting pregnant for granted. And so I'm wondering like the importance of that for you and what people should know going forward.
Yeah, well, I feel like, there was not much shared with me from the previous generations around getting pregnant. So when I went into trying to get pregnant, I felt like, for all the reasons I said earlier, I felt like I should just automatically get pregnant. And I had never really heard of people like struggling to get pregnant before. It wasn't something that was talked about in my family. My mother had me naturally when she was 41, like it just, this narrative really wasn't a part of my community. And, now going through that whole process and knowing that, 50% of pregnancies in the US are unplanned, but the other half of those people who don't spontaneously get pregnant is, a whole rainbow of situations, right? And I just feel like now we are finally in a place where we are openly talking about women's health, all of the chronic issues that women deal with, the chronic stress, the immune disorders, the misdiagnoses, the fact that it's taking 8 years sometimes to diagnose PCOS. Like these are all major factors in a woman's family planning journey. And when we don't have knowledge, it makes it really difficult for us to have a plan of action. And I am very grateful that it feels like this industry has moved light years in the past decade in a lot of ways. Still is very much underfunded. I think women's health got just barely 2% of venture capital in 2024. And let's not forget, women are 50% of the population.
Women founders got 2% of venture capital. I think women's health got even like
no. Women's founder got less than 2%. I think women's health though I think it's like 2.3. The 2.3%. Wow. I mean, it's dismal. It's dismal. And women are 50% of the country.
And a lot of the founders getting backed for women's health companies are men.
Yeah, especially in our category.
That is correct.
Most of our competition, which is why we're investing in our own human clinical studies and, not waiting for the government to fund studies. Like companies just got to take things into their own hands. It's like, it's insane. I mean, as a woman, as a, women's health founder, CEO, and a mom of 3, I felt when I was ready to get pregnant, like I knew more about how to not get pregnant. I knew everything to do to not get pregnant. And then I was like, whoa, what do I do now? And it's just wild that we know so little. There's so little information around body literacy, and that funding has to change. And I think if it's not going to come from governments, it has to come from companies and organizations.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the government has made it crystal clear that they do not have our best interests at hand. So it's very important that we are like funding the private markets. I don't know how else it's going to happen.
Well, that's why we're here for this amazing conversation. So I love this conversation too, because I think we have a lot of people on the journey as customers of Ritual or future customer Rituals that are just trying, just want to understand more about their bodies, but they are trying to get pregnant. We saw that 70% of people that we surveyed had a challenging time, whether it was, like you said, miscarriages or unforeseen challenges, and yet 4% felt seen or heard through media or culture during this time. And it's like we're talking about postpartum, we're starting to talk about we've always been talking about pregnancy, but we rarely talk about that journey and it feels so lonely. And so I'd love to be able to provide people with that information as we're doing now. Robin, I'd love for you to just, we've obviously just heard Hannah's incredible story, but what are some tips that you would give someone who's trying to conceive?
I love that we're having this conversation. And again, I opened with this, and I think it's really important. It's not just about age. And we've been given a story that you don't really have to worry about your fertility until you're over 35. And then, oh, by the way, your fertility falls off a cliff and there's nothing you can do. And neither of those things are true. Another thing that's not true is that if you have a low AMH, anti-Müllerian hormone, that you cannot conceive. I really want to myth bust this. AMH is a lab value that was based on helping IVF doctors understand their likelihood of success. IVF's likelihood of success is different than your ability to conceive. And we've had so many women and my patients with very low AMH levels, showing that maybe they don't have good egg reserve. That's what it's associated with. Come pregnant completely fine, but be told that there's no way that they're going to get pregnant. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have folks, today, younger and younger. 60% of adults have one chronic condition. 40% have two or more chronic conditions. It used to be 30% as of last year. It's for the CDC when they were used to allowed to be talking to us. 40%, now 40% of Americans have two chronic conditions. And the biggest ones have to do with blood sugar and metabolic health, mental health, heart health, immunity and inflammation, GI and microbiome conditions. And these are affecting teenagers. And so I think the myth that I also want to bust for women is that you don't need to worry about your fertility until you're over 35. And there's some really simple things that everyone can start to be aware of. And one of the first things is to get ultra processed foods out of your diet. These foods are spiking your blood sugar. They're filled with chemicals that are hormone disruptors, and they have been shown to reduce fertility. So these are your packaged foods, your processed foods, your things that come in a package with an ingredients list that you can't pronounce, that you have to pop open. You can do so much good work for your body getting pregnant by eating real whole foods. Again, not the answer 100% of the time, people, but it can be game changing for people to change their diet. The next one is taking stress seriously. When we are chronically stressed and chronically in that fight or fight mode, that like running from a lion mode, that many of us are like running from our email, I effectively am, from morning until night, we live in this chronic state of hypervigilance. And what happens in our brain is the hormone from our brain, GnRH, that's talking to our ovaries, that's telling them to follow their cycle and ovulate, is suppressed. And so we don't have the same cycles. Right. And so what is my tip? My tip is, if you're living in that, find like 15 minutes a day just to do a breath practice or a meditation. If meditation's intimidating to you, just breathe. You don't have to meditate, but find a way. What that does is when you do deep breathing, say inhale for 4 and exhale for a count of 6, you stimulate your vagus nerves, which are telling your body to rest, digest, relax, and heal. Most people don't even spend 15 minutes a day in a state of rest, digest, relax, heal, because we are running. But when you do that, your own cycles can start to rebound, because in these things, these little practices, changing the foods, reducing stress, trying to get some of the chemicals out of your makeup and your cleaning products and that are around you, when you make those choices, the body is awesome. It's magic. It often can heal itself. And these things can be happening when you're 21, you're 25, you're 31, you're 35, you're 40, you're 44. They can be impacting you throughout the journey. Yet a lot of people don't know that. So what happens is they're on some form of hormonal birth control. Their doctor or their friend or their mom or the internet or whatever tells them, well, just, go off the pill and get pregnant. They can't, because underneath the pill or the hormonal birth control, again, great forms of birth control, but what they do is they mask what's going on underneath. And then people have a hard time.
Hannah, do you have any products or tips or tools that you used during that fertility journey that you
Um,
recommend?
Yeah, well, before I go there, I wanted to just ask Dr. Berzin. So, one thing that I learned, which I thought was really crazy, was that, the brain signals to the ovaries to release the egg.
Mhm.
And so, for that reason, when Dr. Berzin's talking about stress, like stress impacts your brain, and your brain is responsible for, the egg releasing, which I thought once I like really visualized that and understood that, it made a lot of sense to me. But like, no one ever, I don't know why, I don't even think it was a doctor who told me that. I think it was probably my acupuncturist. Um, and I think it's the stress part of it is so real, especially because when you are already on the journey of trying to get pregnant and it's not happening, and someone tells you to like, chill out, you're like,
Relax. You're like,
you're like,
what?
if one more person tells me to relax, I'm gonna like literally lose my mind. And so that is actually something to be super proactive about, because if you can learn how to manage your stress in these moments, it will 100% change your journey. Some of the other tools that I think for me that really helped was acupuncture. I've always just, my mother exposed me to acupuncture as like a holistic modality when I was literally 6 years old. And it's something that I have used. I think as early as like 19, I started seeing an acupuncturist to deal with all sorts of things, whether it was allergies or muscle tension. And, later in my life, it was fertility. And I still use it to manage stress and to calm my nervous system. It's kind of my weekly thing that I do to just help me stay grounded. So acupuncture was awesome.
And
Some of
acupuncture
the
has great data, everyone, for fertility and for hormone balancing. It's actually really well researched. So we refer at Parsley to acupuncture all the time in this journey for the stress piece, but also because acupuncture works on an energetic level in the body and has been shown to really help you balance your hormones.
Completely agree. That was a modality for me that I really leaned into. Some other things, I mean, I will say that I tend to like lean into some woo-woo things. I saw a woman before my implantation did like an ancient abdominal massage on me that, I don't know if it did anything, but my implantation worked. I don't know, those were some of the things that I kind of leaned into. Again, like for me to feel like I was in control when I felt so out of control. And then I have to say that as the week after I got pregnant with Preston, my first child, we went into a complete lockdown. It was COVID. And I no longer had access to any of those things. And I went through my pregnancy in the first, Preston was born November 2020 before there were vaccines that, luckily my husband was allowed in the delivery room by that time. And I'm still waiting to have a book or some sort of podcast of the births that went down in April of 2020 when, husbands were not allowed in the room. I mean, my best friend was one of those patients who had her first kid basically in a hazmat suit without her husband there. And
I was one of those. So
there you go.
No, it was my third. So I think it hit different. But I think like for you going through everything that you had just went through in your fertility journey to then have your first kid during that time, it's just wild
crazy.
because it isn't normal and it shouldn't be normal. And Robin,
Yeah.
You're probably on the receiving end as a doctor with all these patients and a practice coming in.
I mean, and I think in myself too, like my second was born right before COVID. So February 2020, we just celebrated her 5th birthday, like this past weekend. And I remember being like, I'm free. I'm ready to party. I'm ready to like live. And like 3 weeks later was like, you will go inside. And My third was born in September 2021. So I had sort of back to back, and we were sort of still in it. So it's a very like weird, out of space and time period of time and for everyone. And extremely grateful that, we got through that okay at the end. But I think some of these practices that can help us with our fertility, like yoga, like meditation, like feeding your body in a way that doesn't crank up your nervous system with too much caffeine and sugar, which causes brain inflammation. Those same things, I think, got us through that time. And I think these are the same tools that get us through a healthy pregnancy and that can save us postpartum. But not enough women, our level of health literacy in America is overall so low. We teach people to tie our shoes and brush our teeth. We don't teach anybody to like generate and take care of a healthy body. And I forget which one of you said earlier, like we can't depend on the government to fund women's health research. We also can't depend on any sort of school, as far as I can tell, to teach us how to generate health as opposed to generating a disease, which is what we are all kind of set up for. And I don't think we talk enough about how this is impacting our fertility and pregnancy journeys for the worse. And it really is. And those are the things like high blood pressure, high blood sugar, diabetes, that inflammation, right? These are the things that not only impair fertility, but they also then lead to worse birth outcomes, NICU stays, preeclampsia, preterm labor. I just think that women deserve a lot more information about how to work with their own body to avoid these things, as opposed to being in a situation where now you have them.
Yeah. And kind of an investigator. There's a couple of questions I have before we wrap up. One is that you guys are both people that I know that are really into like fitness for mental health. Like, but I see all your workouts online, Hannah, and you and your husband and Robin, you've been a yogi since like, I don't know. How do you guys feel like fitness plays a role in this journey?
So for me, working out is definitely like a mental release and definitely like allows my body to get stress out. It feels like a big release for me. And like that also, I love the endorphins that I get from working out. And it just makes me also kind of feel very in tune with my body. I grew up a dancer, so I kind of just know how to not push myself too hard, but also push myself hard enough. And I feel like that's a part of like my whole kind of mind body connection that I try to really practice. But I will also say that going through the journey of fertility treatments and all of those things made me a little crazy with the working out, because for me, it was like the first 2 weeks of my cycle, I knew that I could work out and I could work out hard and I could do the cardio that I wanted to do if that's what I was into at the time. And by that time that I thought I was maybe going to be closer to getting pregnant, that would change and I would do things that were more restorative and the rhythm I got into. And I actually realized that what I was really doing was working out to optimize for my hormones. That was foreshadowing what I do now, which is like work out for my hormones. So I kind of tailor my workouts to the phases that I'm going through in my cycle. I like lift heavy when I'm in my luteal phase. I tend to not really work out at all when the week I have my period, or maybe I'm doing like restorative yoga. And then I try and do things that are more kind of like body weight or Pilates or a little bit more high intensity in those like first 2 weeks of my cycle. And that's actually where I'm one of these people where I don't get obsessed with one workout. So for someone like me, that's great because I'm kind of cycling through different things that keep me, I'm like a workout guinea pig. I love trying new things and going new places and new studios. So that's kind of the way I cycle through, but it's also the way I've seen most progress in my strength and my muscle tone.
That's beautiful. It like impacted how you think about like physical activity and your cycle for the rest of your life. I think about that that way as well. Robin, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I get really annoyed about is that the world tells like women in fertility and pregnancy to like be a couch potato. And it's like the worst thing you can do. Like, obviously, take care of your body and rest if you need rest. But uh, lean muscle mass is how we maintain our metabolism. And when our blood sugar goes up, guess what? Insulin goes up. Insulin's a hormone and it takes the sugar in our bloodstream and it puts it away so there's not too much in our bloodstream. But then when insulin goes up, testosterone goes up. And testosterone is converted into estrogen. And so just like the brain is connected to our ovulation, our blood sugar is connected to how everything that happens downstream. And so that's where you get PCOS and even endometriosis and irregular periods. And in pregnancy, I'm always tell my mamas, like, we got to keep our lean muscle mass up. So keep yourself moving. Like you need strength to push that baby out. You're going to need strength on the other side. When we're pregnant, we go through major brain changes, some of which never go back and set us up for higher risk of dementia later. But exercise actually helps protect our brain and create neuroplasticity. The other thing that happens in pregnancy certainly happened to me, and I'm like still recovering from it, is that we lose a lot of our lean muscle mass. So even if you were like a total nerd who was just generally forced to play sports like myself, as opposed to an athlete, someone who's more athletic, like probably you two, we have a certain level of muscle when we're younger, right? Just from like playing sports, dancing, living life, being younger. And then pregnancy, we lose an epic amount of lean muscle mass. And some of the biggest muscles in our body, our core, actually kind of goes to jello, right? After 3 kids, I've had such horrible diathesis, which is the splitting of the abdominal muscles. Like when I lie down, like you could like put a, like I was like, you could like fish in a pond and hear people. Like this is ridiculous. And a lot of my journey postpartum over the past couple of years has been like just rebuilding my lean muscle mass because it has such important implications. Now I'm not in menopause. I think I have a few years to go. I'm 43, but like as I look ahead to menopause, one of the most important things I'm going to do for my hormone balance is rebuild, and my bones and my brain. I call it my brains, bones, and booty protocol. Part of the BBB protocol is really around building that lean muscle mass for that future. And especially because metabolically has such impact, even how we experience menopause and have a healthier menopause. So like all the way through, it matters. And I always try to reframe exercise. Like it's not about, listen, it can be about getting fit and looking hot. That's awesome. And it's also about how do we make sure that our body is functioning in a way that is going to keep us feeling, looking good next year and 10 years from now and 20 years from now. I've been personally, as you mentioned, like I've always been a yoga geek, and kind of a couple years, my youngest is 3 now, at postpartum, like a year ago, I was like, it's not doing it. And I started weight training, and I even started Pilates. And I was always thought Pilates was like really, sorry, everyone, like annoying and boring. And like, it makes this like squeaking noise in my brain. Like it's too like.
Tell me you're a newfound Pilates girl.
The past year, I did Pilates this morning.
Wow.
This amazing woman named Annie in New York. And I am a convert a few sessions in. Oh, transformed and healed my core strength. And my diastasis is not completely gone, but it is miles better in a way that yoga wasn't doing. And then this year, we got a weight set at home, just like cheap off of Amazon, sitting in the weights at home. Hannah be so proud of me.
I'm so proud of you.
Last night. And I'm like, all right, brains, bones, and booty. I got to start building. I'm 43, like don't have a lot of time to go, people. Like, let's roll.
So I just wanted to ask Dr. Berzin a question before we move on. I mean, it's not really on the workout, although I'm so proud of you that you're into Pilates now and doing the weight training. Like it's just, it really is completely life changing. But what I want to ask you honestly is, you had brought up like the brain fog and what happens to our brain chemistry changes during pregnancy. Can you actually tell me an answer as to why I think my body has completely like forgotten what postpartum was like? I feel like I have actual large gaps missing from my memory around like some things in my pregnancy, some things postpartum. Like, is that just because our body wants us to forget so that we'll have more kids? Or like, what is that?
I mean, it's definitely possible, but also there's real brain changes that happen in pregnancy that actually never go away long term. And it's believed that that first major life transition or major era for us as women, plus our menopause years when our estrogens and progesterones and sometimes also testosterone really decline, those two things together really set us up to have twice the rate of Alzheimer's disease and dementia as men. So that's like longer term. And then shorter term, there's a couple things going on. You have had brain changes. You've also had major hormonal fluctuations. You've also gone through a major life transition. And postpartum, you have all those three things that are going to interrupt the way that your brain processes memory and stores memory, because memories are proteins. They're coded in protein in your brain. And so what we're living, what we're eating, our experiences, our hormones are going to shift the way memory is encoded, period. And then you add to that, what I see a lot of is women kind of in this year postpartum, it's like, I no longer exist and everything's about baby, pediatrician's appointments and health of baby and feeding baby and adjusting to baby. And we forget about ourselves. And in that, pregnancy sort of takes over for a while, but a lot of women have kind of the rebound of the conditions they had before. So if they had autoimmune issues, they went quiet during pregnancy because of our high progesterone. Now we're having autoimmune flares. The GI issues that were kind of like on the back burner, they're back. And so, but for a lot of women, I find, and I see in my practice, like people kind of block that out, or they almost feel like they have no choice but to ignore it, and they ignore their own health in this period. And then on top of everything else from the brain changes I mentioned, you also have sometimes health issues that are coming up that are just impacting your overall mental and physical health. And then on top of all of that, we kind of give our baby, especially if we breastfeed, but even in pregnancy, your brain's made of fat. And a lot of our omega-3s, our good fats, are going to baby. And what I see a lot postpartum, and so why I'm so glad Ritual is helping change this, right, is women forget to like refill the tank. They don't refill the tank with omega-3 fats. They don't refill the tank of their calcium stores because bone mass is also going to baby. They don't rebuild that lean muscle mass. They don't rebuild bones. They don't get their metabolism back. And then they go off and they have another baby and the cycle starts again. And so I see a lot of those baby 2, baby 3, sometimes baby 4, super depleted moms who never were able or had the space or time or knowledge to kind of refill in the interim, which is so important. It's kind of like this missing part of midlife. I feel like we go from fertility to pregnancy and then it's menopause. And I'm like, but there's like a whole, often for some women, 20 years, for others like 10, in between, where we have this like golden opportunity to restore. And part of that is restoring our brains. B vitamins, omega-3 fats, and weight-bearing exercise are 3 of the things that I really recommend to kind of give your brain that boost after baby.
I love that. We actually have a postpartum episode, which I love. But I do love this conversation because it's all so connected. And you start with fertility and then, you have this journey. And if you get pregnant and go through postpartum, then you have to do it again. And so you really need to take care of yourself throughout. And I would love to wrap up with some rituals. As you guys know, the brand name is Ritual, and it's this idea of elevating a routine to a habit and ritual. And you guys have mentioned some of them throughout, but what were some of those rituals and things that really impacted your day-to-day that you would love to impart with the audience through fertility and your own fertility journey?
I think for me, it was definitely the exercise piece. Again, for me, during that first pregnancy, that's all I had because of the COVID time. Like I had, multiple online outlets. I feel like online working out like really had a huge boom during COVID. And that was, I took, whether it was some days, it was literally 15 minutes and some days it was 40 minutes. So the working out and showing up on a mat for myself every day, again, felt like the thing that really allowed me to just like have that deep breath meditation moment, even though it wasn't, actual meditation. And then I think also like definitely feeling on track with my supplements and keeping my supplement routine, together was big. And then even now in postpartum, I think something that I'm loving is actually my protein intake. I think as women, we underestimate how much protein we actually need to build lean muscle. And sometimes when I'm, out at a restaurant and I want the pasta, I'm going to order the pasta. And like, that's totally fine because I also know that I'm getting 40 grams of protein, mid-morning.
The rituals for me, I think in general, my like morning ritual is I've done habit stacking effectively so that I've tied my 15-minute morning meditation to my espresso, which sounds like they don't go together, but it's the perfect combination. I look forward to my espresso, like basically when I'm done with my espresso at like 7 a.m, and then I habit stacked my meditation. So I take it, and even if there's like a kid sitting on me or the kids are screaming or it's loud, I like go up to the living room and out of the kitchen and I do my meditation. And that really transforms my day. And then I think it relates to fertility specifically. I actually found the fertility journey as I like did a lot of things you did, Hannah. I like did heavy metal chelation. I was on a prenatal. One of the things I found was that in a positive way, it changed my relationship with food, because I started to think about food as like nourishment and everything I needed to build a healthy baby. And I think that as women, we have a very complicated relationship with food that's impressed upon us from a very young age. And I kind of got into like, how am I eating the most nourishing foods and how am I getting healthy fats and proteins and greens and thinking about all the phytonutrients. And so it made just eating every day like something that was a little bit more of a ritual as opposed to something that was just about like fuel and eating. And now I'm with you. I don't get enough protein. It's something I really have to, well, I do, but I have to like focus on it. And I'm taking both collagen and creatine because I find that if I just leave it to myself to take in like enough animal protein and even like a great, vegan protein powder, it just like, I won't get there. And you do need between 0.7 and 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight a day if you're trying to build any like meaningful lean muscle mass.
Some good tips. All right. Well, this was an amazing episode. I feel really inspired by both of you and your journeys and hearing your tips. And I think it'll inspire our customers so much. So thank you both and looking forward to staying in touch.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.